interrupt this program for important
Hello, kids. Today I want to talk to you about one of my favorite genres of books, fantasy. Fantasy books come in all makes and sizes. One type of fantasy that you might not consider to be fantasy is science fiction. Science fiction is a subgenre of fantasy that gets its fantastical elements through a technology, spaceships and that sort of thing. For the purposes of this book talk, we're not going to worry about science fiction. We're going to stick with the more traditional fantasies. Now let's talk a little bit about the components of the fantasy genre. One thing that you will find in fantasy books, all fantasy books, is that there is something different. This could take shape in a lot of different ways. One way is that there are talking creatures or objects. This could be talking animals, or it could be toys that have come to life. Wait a sec. Did that thing just move?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, in real life, that's a little creepy. Another difference that you'll see in a fantasy story is that usually the characters will either run into or themselves be mythical beings. These could be Greek gods, centaurs, mermaids, dragons, that sort of thing. Oh great, not again.
Foolish mortal, your end is nigh, for I am a mythical being, sort of.
A lot of times in a fantasy setting, if you encounter a mythical being and you aren't already one yourself, or at least friends with some, it tends to not be a whole lot of fun for you. Last, but certainly not least, there is magic. Magic is often the foundation of the fantasy world. It can show up in a lot of different forms, but for the most part, magic appears in the form of a magic item, such as Bilbo's ring or Harry Potter's wand, or as a magic power, like a wizard's spell or Percy Jackson's ability to control water. Whoa! How did you get in here?
Silly Buggle, I used my magic phone to teleport.
Magic phone. That's a good one. I prefer to use magic powers.
Dad, hurry! I'm out of here!
A second key component of the fantasy story is the setting. In fantasies, the setting tends to fall into one of three categories. The first type of setting is in a world other than our own, where the characters have always lived and are not overly surprised by any of the fantastical elements that they encounter. An example of this type of setting is Middle-earth, from the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit series, where Bilbo and Frodo were not surprised by the presence of elves or the monsters that they met on their travels. Hello, Legolas! Hello, Frodo. The only way that would have been weird is if he wasn't an elf. Another type of setting is a fantasy world to which characters from our world travel. This is normally an accident involving some sort of portal, and their adventure often involves them trying to return home. This is a very common setup for a fantasy story, and there are many examples, as are there numerous types of portals the heroes stumble through. For example, Alice falling down a hole.
There's probably another fantasy world at the bottom of this hole.
Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy entering a wardrobe in the Chronicles of Narnia.
I think we should go into this wardrobe.
I think that is a stupid idea that will result in a long adventure.
And even being swallowed by a hippo. Yes, that's a thing. The final type of setting that we often find in the fantasy genre is a world that is supposed to be our world, but with some fantasy element, either hidden or out in the open. Examples of this would be Harry Potter, who lives in modern-day England, but knows that magic exists, even if most people aren't aware of it. Another example is found in the Temeraire series by Naomi Novik, which takes place in 19th century Europe and is fairly historically accurate, except for all the dragons that people are riding around on. Well, that was disappointing, but you get the idea. A third component of the fantasy genre is theme. Most fantasies have one or more of a select group of themes. Typically, they are the themes that you would expect to find in most adventure stories. Good versus evil, friendship, perseverance against all odds, love, those sorts of things. Of course, these themes are often taken to an epic level. Our heroes won't just have an evil boy at school who's mildly annoying that they have to overcome. They will have an evil wizard bent on world conquest who has a personal vendetta against them and only one can survive. And our heroes won't have a friend that they just like to talk to from time to time. No, they'll have a friend who has sacrificed everything for them and is dragging them up an erupting volcano when they don't have the strength to go on, just so they can finish their quest. But like I said, epic. Of course, it doesn't necessarily have to be that large of an epic story, but it tends to be more often than not. Alright, enough about that. Let's look at some specific books. Over here in the library, I have several wonderful fantasy novels that I want to talk to you about. The first of these is The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. This is a classic fantasy that is a lot of fun. Dorothy is a regular girl living with her aunt and uncle in Kansas when a tornado whisks her and her dog Toto to the incredible land of Oz, where she immediately runs into trouble with the Wicked Witch of the West. Here we see a character from our world being teleported to another world, and a case where an ordinary person does the extraordinary. One of the great parts about The Wizard of Oz are all the interesting characters Dorothy meets as she tries to reach the wizard in the Emerald City so he can send her home. One of my favorite scenes is when Dorothy and her friends, the Tin Woodsman and the Scarecrow, meet the lion. At first he acts very scary, but is soon revealed to be quite cowardly. Here's a little excerpt from that scene. "But that isn't right. The King of Beasts shouldn't be a coward," said the Scarecrow. "I know it," returned the lion, wiping a tear from his eye with the tip of his tail. "It is my great sorrow and makes my life very unhappy, but whenever there is danger, my heart begins to beat fast." "Perhaps you have a heart disease," said the Tin Woodman. "It may be," said the lion. "If you have," continued the Tin Woodman, "you ought to be glad, for it proves you have a heart. For my part, I have no heart, so I cannot have heart disease." "Perhaps," said the lion thoughtfully, "if I had no heart, I should not be a coward." "Have you brains?" asked the Scarecrow. "I suppose so. I've never looked to see," replied the lion. Now, some of you may have seen the movie The Wizard of Oz that is based on this book. While that is a great movie, there are quite a few things from the book that aren't in it, and, in my opinion, the book is better. The reading level on The Wizard of Oz is U, but those of you who are a little under that should be able to read it without too much trouble. So, if you are interested in a story with funny characters, strong friendships, a few scary moments of adventure, witches, monkeys, and so much more, be sure to check this one out. If you like it, there are several more in this series that you might enjoy as well. The second book I want to talk about is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. This is actually the book that got me interested in reading way back in 3rd grade. It is a story of 4 children, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, who accidentally stumble across a magic portal found in a wardrobe that leads to another world called Narnia. Narnia is a land where talking animals, mythical beings, and magic are all commonplace. In fact, the only thing that isn't common are humans. It is actually because they are humans that the children are seen as a threat to the ruler of Narnia, the White Witch. Here is a small excerpt from a scene in which Lucy meets the faun, Mr. Tumnus, and is trying to explain to him where she came from. I got in through the wardrobe in the spare room," said Lucy. "Ah," said Mr. Tumnus in a rather melancholy voice, "if only I had worked harder at geography when I was a little faun, I should no doubt know all about those strange countries. It is too late now." "But they aren't countries at all," said Lucy, almost laughing. "It's only just back there. At least, I'm not sure. It is summer there." "Meanwhile," said Mr. Tumnus, "it is winter in Narnia and has been for ever so long, and we shall both catch cold if we stand here talking in the snow. Daughter of Eve, from the far land of Spare where eternal sun reigns around the bright city of Wardrobe, how would it be if you came and had tea with me?" There are 7 books in the Chronicles of Narnia, and they are all excellent. These are classic fantasies that can be enjoyed no matter your age. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe's reading level is T, and if you're looking for adventure in a fun world that is both dangerous and exciting, this might be the book for you. The next book I want to talk about is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. Just as a brief introduction to Howl's Moving Castle, this is Sophie, and in the beginning, she works in a hat shop. This is still Sophie. Unfortunately, she runs into a witch who turns her into an old woman. Our excerpt takes place shortly after Sophie has been turned into an old woman and left her home. She sneaks into a moving castle that belongs to the wizard Howl, who is believed to be quite evil. She decides to stay. Howl's apprentice Michael and the fire demon named Calcifer are unable to stand up to her. This scene takes place as Howl returns home to find Sophie cooking breakfast using Calcifer as the fire. "She says her name's Sophie," Michael said. "She came last night." "How did she make Calcifer bend down?" said Howl. "She bullied me," Calcifer said in a piteous muffled voice from under the sizzling pan. "How many people can do that?" Howl said thoughtfully. He propped his guitar in the corner and came over to the hearth. The smell of hyacinths mixed with the smell of bacon as he shoved Sophie firmly aside. "Calcifer doesn't like anyone but me to cook on him," he said, kneeling down and wrapping one trailing sleeve around his hand to hold the pan. "Pass me 2 more slices of bacon and 6 more eggs, please, and tell me why you've come here." Howl's Moving Castle is a Level U book. It also has a wonderful animated movie based on it, but, as always, the book is better. It's an excellent story with rich and often funny characters, a touch of mystery, many exciting moments, and even some romance. If these elements sound interesting to you, you will probably enjoy this one. Our next book probably needs no introduction. It's a modern fantasy classic that is a global phenomenon. I am, of course, referring to Harry Potter. This is a 7-book series that follows the young wizard Harry as he goes from knowing nothing about the wizarding world to trying to save it from the evil Lord Voldemort. The excerpt we have from Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone takes place after Harry has traveled to the wizard school of Hogwarts and is about to be sorted by the magical sorting hat into the house, which is like a dorm, that he will be living in while he goes to school. And then, at last, "Potter! Harry!" As Harry stepped forward, whispers suddenly broke out like little hissing fires all over the hall. "Potter, did she say? The Harry Potter?" The last thing Harry saw before the hat dropped over his eyes was the hall full of people craning to get a good look at him. Next second, he was looking at the black inside of the hat. He waited. Said a small voice in his ear. "Difficult, very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind, either. There's talent, oh my goodness, yes. And a nice thirst to prove yourself. Now that's interesting. So where shall I put you?" Harry gripped the edges of the stool and thought, "Not Slytherin, not Slytherin." "Not Slytherin, eh?" said the small voice. "Are you sure? You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head, and Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness, no doubt about that. No? Well, if you're sure, better be Gryffindor!" Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is a Level V book. There are some very tricky words that might give you a little trouble, especially the names of the magic spells, but it is a great fantasy story. Now, no doubt many of you have watched the movies for this series, and let me tell you, the book is better. I know I always say that, but it's true. In this case, it's 1 billion times better, maybe 100 billion times, and that might be putting it lightly. So, if you like the idea of someone on the hero's journey with lots of magic, funny moments, mysteries, great friendships, and many unexpected plot twists, be sure to check out this book series. The next book is the beginning of a trilogy, and it's a little different from the others. It's not a classic, not even close, and there hasn't been a movie made out of it either. Personally, I think this is a good thing. What it is, however, is incredibly inventive and a lot of fun. The book I'm referring to is Beyonders, A World Without Heroes by Brandon Mull. I picked this book up because I thought the cover looked interesting, and I read the prologue and first chapter in the bookstore. That was what had me hooked. It is the story of Jason and Rachel, 2 kids from our world who accidentally end up in a fantasy world called Lyrian, where an evil wizard has almost conquered the planet and has seemingly defeated every hero who could stop him from finishing the job. The initial draw to this book, for me, was the way that Jason ends up in Lyrian. Usually a character falls in a hole, hides in a closet, or gets sucked into a tornado to get to another world, but Jason takes a different sort of route. The scene I'm going to share is how Jason finds the portal to Lyrian. Faintly, Jason heard tinkling music rising from the water of the hippo tank. The hippo yawned, and for that instant the music became much louder and more distinct, as if the hippo truly were the source of the elaborate tune. Could the hippo have swallowed a stereo? That was the only plausible explanation, but it seemed just as ludicrous as the idea that the hippo was spontaneously producing the sound. Leaning his stomach against the top of the railing, Jason teetered far over the metal bar, baffled by the melody. As his ear descended toward the rippling surface, he overbalanced, lost his grip, and plunged headfirst into the pool above the massive hippo. The hippopotamus surged upward with jaws agape, the music chiming louder than ever. Before Jason could react, his hands were grasping at a slimy tongue, and his face was sliding against a greasy surface. Sprawled in his belly, he raced along a dark, slippery tunnel. I've read a lot of fantasy books, but I'm pretty sure this is the only time I've heard of someone traveling to another world through the mouth of a hippopotamus. The Beyonders, A World Without Heroes, can be a pretty difficult book. It's a level X, and with good reason. If you're interested in it, be warned that it takes a little while to get going, but once it does, it is an excellent fantasy. Our final book is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is the prequel to The Lord of the Rings, one of the greatest fantasies, and probably the greatest fantasy setting ever. I picked The Hobbit over The Lord of the Rings, which is also available if you're interested, because it is a bit easier to read and significantly lighter in tone. The Hobbit is the story of Bilbo Baggins, a simple little man who is enjoying his relaxing, quiet life until the wizard Gandalf shows up at his doorstep and recruits him to go on an adventure with a band of dwarves. Our excerpt comes from the opening scene in which Bilbo has his pleasant morning interrupted and ruined by Gandalf's arrival. "Very pretty," said Gandalf, "but I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning. I am looking for someone to share in an adventure that I am arranging, and it is very difficult to find anyone." "I should think so, in these parts. We are plain, quiet folk and have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things make you late for dinner. I can't think what anybody sees in them," said our Mr. Baggins, and stuck one thumb behind his braces and blew out an even bigger smoke ring. The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings feature a great many classic fantasy elements. There is magic, mythical beings, and above all, epic quests. The Hobbit is a level Z book, and The Lord of the Rings is even harder. There are some big words and crazy elven names for things, so be warned. However, if you can get past these are fantastic books. And that is the end of our book talk. All of these fantasy books and many, many more are in our library for you to look through as you pick your next book. Happy reading!